It's looking good. And that means that we're on air now. Let me check that on YouTube. Yes, stream looking good. Alright, I'm going to switch to Swiss German now. Herzlich willkommen auf dem Geek-Sofa Spezial. Wenn ihr euch wundert, wieso ihr nichts seht, ich bin schuld. Wir haben ein falsches Kabel mitgekommen, glaubst. Das ist mein Verdacht im Moment. Ein Kabel, das kaputt ist, statt das Richtige. Darum haben wir kein Kamerasignal. Wir powern durch. Wir machen es trotzdem, und zwar einfach in Ton. Also lehnt euch zurück, könnt irgendetwas anderes machen im Browser, schaltet den Tab in den Hintergrund und hört das einfach zu. Wir haben als Gast da den Dominik Gotojuch, weil wir auch gleichzeitig vor einem Live-Publikum streamen, nämlich die Leute, die hier am Ludicious sind, wechsle ich wieder auf Englisch zurück, auch weil der Dominik Englisch redet mit uns. Das war einfach schnell die Erklärung für euch, für das Publikum daheim. Und jetzt schalte ich zurück auf Englisch. So, that was the announcement for the people at home. I'm going to switch back to English now. And I think the people at home want to hear you now, you guys here, that they understand that it's a live audience that is actually here. So make some noise, Ludicious. Make some noise for the audience at home. All right, and now I finally can introduce our guest. This is Dominik Gotojuch. You're from Poland.
Yes, that's correct. Hi, everyone.
He has a very interesting career. We watched your talk this morning, we listened to you, we read your biography or your short little bio on the website, and we thought this is a guy that we want to talk to. So that's what we're going to do for the next, let's say 40-50 minutes or so. We're going to expose everything.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to help you expose things.
I would like to start with just a simple question. You wrote on the website that you wanted to be an actor. I think we can kind of see that you're a person that likes to be on a stage. You have a costume. So how far into an actual acting career did you go?
So actually, when I was about to finish high school, I was almost certain I would go and study computing, but then I was talking to a relative of mine and they asked me, are you really sure you want to study computing? And I said, no. And the fact was that I was actually more into theater/movie making at the time. I was doing a lot of amateur movie making, I was doing a lot of theater at school, and I thought being an actor is an interesting choice, doing things with movies. So I applied to film school in the biggest one in Poland for acting. And I actually spent 6 months preparing for the exams at the school. I practiced with my uncle who worked at the opera for the singing parts. That was terrible.
Yeah. But it's good to build your voice, I guess.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I actually
hold your microphone a bit closer.
All right.
Thank you.
I actually lived in a theater for a week, watching the actors play. I've seen like the same play being played 3 or 4 times. It was different every time. It was a fascinating experience. Yeah. And I went to do the audition, the exams, and it was like a pre-exam to give you an opportunity to improve certain things before the actual exam. And it was funny because I met like famous Polish actors. I did my bit, and they told me that I wouldn't get in.
Yeah.
And the reason was that I have a slight problem with certain Polish sounds, and I cannot like pronounce them properly in Polish.
Which sounds?
Show us. Show us how it. Or are we putting you on the spot?
A little bit. Yeah, I'm starting to sweat. I don't even remember which ones, to be fair, but Polish has a lot of weird sounds like sh, sh, and
sounds that no one outside Poland can make anyway.
Pretty much. Yeah. So I didn't get in because of that, but I went to the exams. I had a lot of fun, and it felt like a very refreshing experience before actually kind of plunging myself into the very logical, science-driven computing science. And I think that kind of helped me maintain a certain balance. I'm a technical person by trade, you could say, because I graduated as a software engineer. But at the same time, I have this soft spot, and that's why I also work, and I think I'm doing good work as a designer and a writer.
That sounds like an ideal kind of combination of abilities to go into an industry like the game industry that is a mixture of a lot of very technical stuff and also artistic stuff. Did you already know at that point when you started studying computer science? Was games already kind of a goal or an ambition?
It was, I'd say, a very, very quiet dream that I didn't really boast about. I think I told someone at one point before thinking about it, before actually considering it as a career, and they were like, "Oh, it's so hard. There's no studios in Poland." At the time, like the Witcher guys only got together when starting to build the first Witcher game. There were a couple of studios in Poland, but they were mostly either closed down or kind of struggling to survive. So the only option was career abroad. So it was unattainable at that point. Poland was also not in the European Union back then. So like traveling abroad was like, wow, this is a huge step.
Getting visas and just difficult. Yeah.
So it was a completely different world. And then within the span of 5 years, it all changed. The borders opened. The world became smaller for us, and I myself went to study abroad in Scotland, which was eye-opening as well.
So that's your entrance into the UK. You went studying there in Edinburgh, I'm guessing.
No, never in Edinburgh, in Glasgow.
Oh, okay. I think I can feel a little bit of tension. So you immersed yourself into the Scottish spirit and learned all the do's and don'ts, and being in Glasgow means not liking Edinburgh.
Yes, if you're a Glaswegian, you have a bit of a dislike towards Edinburgh. Don't get me wrong, Edinburgh is a lovely city. I really like it. But Glasgow is the place to be.
We're both not Scottish, so I don't think we're going to fight about that. So how long were you there? How long were you in Glasgow?
So it was over 4 years.
Oh, okay.
So I finished my bachelor's there, and I started doing my PhD there. And made the first steps into the bigger, great world of computing and then games. So.
And then Lionhead, how did that happen? How did you get into Lionhead? Right out of the gate after your studies were finished?
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh my God, how? I think a lot of people in here would like to know how one achieves such a step.
So at the time I was still under the impression that to become a game developer, especially after school, you have to go and study something very concrete like computing science, excel at it, and go and apply. And maybe by some chance you get in somewhere for an internship or whatnot. And I actually tried to get an internship on my third year, but I didn't get in. I think I applied to Rockstar, I applied to Traveler's Tales.
Oh, just let me interrupt you there real quick. Was that a conscious choice that affected your choice to go to Glasgow? Because there is a games industry in Great Britain?
No, not really.
Okay, so that was more like a nice coincidence that there were companies there.
It would sound funny, and maybe I'll come off looking a bit silly, but I didn't realize Rockstar was based in Scotland at the time when I went. And I was completely sure it's an American studio, American game. I was like, oh wow, okay, British games industry. There you go.
They're right here.
They're the titans, or at least they used to be. Finger crossed, they kind of regained their powers after losing a couple of really good studios, including Lionhead, which I kind of caught I think the last time when they were still in a very good position, because Peter Molyneux was still there, and all of the senior staff that were responsible for bringing all the great games to the audiences worldwide were still there. And it was really amazing to see that actually most of their staff were like long-standing staff. Like 90% of their developers were there for over 5 years, I think, and a lot of them were over 10 years, like since the inception of Lionhead in 1997.
Yeah. So
it was incredible to work with veterans, but also veterans who were so engaged and invested in the vision of this one studio and the man who headed it that they stuck through.
I just want to stay a little bit longer. How you actually got in? How did you apply? What did you send them into?
So what happened was I sent in the kind of normal submission, normal application, and I think I did a little pet project, a game that was attached as kind of a reference of what I can do in terms of coding and in terms of very, very simple game development, because at the time I did not know how to make games.
What was it called? What was it about, this game?
Oh, I have no idea. Like, I don't remember. I think it was
this morning in our talk you told us that one of the first programming things that you did was a game, a chess engine, a chess game. So was that connected to chess as well, or was it something completely different?
No, it wasn't a chess game. Because what I did at college was the chess game. That was my kind of first entry into the games development.
Yeah.
For my final year project, I did mobile games when smartphones were not around yet, and I had this like prototype Nokia smartphone with 2 sensors attached, which would give you gyroscope and accelerometers. So I would have this like big bulky phone that you would like play kind of Wii-like tennis, like in the air with another person. So I think I sent them a bit of code from that, but I also did like a Arkanoid kind of thing, and I think that was the game that I actually sent them.
Yeah.
It was probably terrible, and I don't want to remember about it, but somehow it got me an interview. So I went to Guildford, south of London, where Lionhead used to be based, and this is actually a very interesting place on the UK's game development map, because a lot of studios are based there. Bullfrog used to be there, so EA is there. Codemasters are nearby, so it's like pretty much a game development mecca in the UK.
Yeah. Or it used to be, I think. Not sure if it's still there, with Lionhead being not the same.
Well, it's one of the studios, right?
Yeah.
Media Molecule is still there.
Oh,
so
yeah.
There's a couple of smaller ones as well.
And what was your first job? What did you do at Lionhead?
So I was a gameplay
They probably didn't let you work with your weird Nokia Wii tennis thing anymore, right?
Oh, I was happy about that. I was always about, like, truth be told, like, I was very skeptical about mobiles in general. I didn't own a smartphone until 2011, I think.
Okay.
2012, I had this like old-style retro phone, so I was very conservative in that regard. But what I always wanted to do was to make like these bigger AAA games. I wanted to be a part of a team that would create interesting, fascinating worlds that you can explore, traverse, meet people in them, find out more about the histories behind those.
So you had this fantasy about how it would be working at this big AAA company, and then how was the reality?
So for Lionhead, I thought it was pretty much a dream come true. It was everything I ever imagined it to be, and at the same more. Lionhead was very specific, I think, in regards that it was still a kind of 90s culture-based studio. You had a leading figure, Peter Molyneux, who was like the visionary, and you had a very talented, very experienced team right behind him, backing him up, and actually leading the charge with the development effort. He also had a lot of very eager and talented young people who joined Lionhead like a year or 2 years before I joined in. So there was a very good mixture of kind of young and old developers, old in regards to being experienced not just as game developers, but also experienced from in terms of life. So in my career, I found that it's not just about being able to pull most hours or having the biggest experience in terms of the years you spend in the industry or the number of games to develop, but also to have a bit of a different perspective of life as in general, which pretty much enriches not only the games you make, but also the way in which you make them with other people.
So how did it change your way of looking at life in your time at Lionhead?
Well, the first thing I realized was after roughly, I think, a week or two, I thought, wow, yes, games. I want to make games for the rest of my life. This is it. It's always, like, I always thought it's my passion from a perspective of a gamer, and I was kind of itching to be able to try my strengths at creating games. But I never thought it would be a passion that completely consumes me. Like, pretty much, I started working and I knew I don't want to do anything else because it was the most amazing thing I've ever done in terms of doing work. It didn't seem like work at all.
Seems like you didn't worked a lot.
Well, I did actually.
How many hours?
At Lionhead, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, what's a normal week?
I was roughly 8 hours every day. There was a couple of times when we had to spend a bit more time because we were preparing builds for shows or whatnot. But generally, they were very skeptical about crunch, and their crunch, even at the time when like crunch was running wild in different studios, it was very, very mild. And they took really good care of their employees, and they were very concerned about delivering the quality, which was fantastic, but not just the quality in terms of we have this build we want to present, it has to be of highest quality. It was the build, but at the same time the game in the long term. The game was always there as a priority, which was not the case in some other studios that I know of or I worked at, where you would have different priorities shift all the time, which would put stress on the development team because they would have to kind of refocus their priorities and their development efforts and work in a very kind of stressful and strained environment.
Now you have your own games company. How do you handle your employees?
So the idea is, we started off as a duo, so it was just the two of us. It was a very friendly partnership, especially that Juliusz, the other co-founder of Gentleman, is my longtime friend. We actually applied to film school together, though he went for the special effects course and I went for acting. We both got rejected, so he ended up studying arts, and he's actually a licensed arts teacher. He could teach art at school, but he doesn't. So he went to make movies, and I went to do software engineering and then games. So kind of came together, and the moment we started getting more people for our team, we felt that we want to maintain as much of the kind of friendly partnership and camaraderie that we had as two friends. So we had a very strict recruitment process, if you will. We were looking for people who would not only fit into our team in terms of their skills and knowledge and backgrounds, like technical backgrounds, but also as people in terms of how they think about the world, about the games that they want to make. So we always asked a lot of questions about what kind of games would they make, what would they do if they had this and that situation, and we were trying to find these kind of free-thinking, unorthodox souls that would be complementary to what we were trying to achieve, which is a bit of a, you could say, collective slash cooperative of fellow-minded developers. So that was the dream. It doesn't always work like that, unfortunately. There's always a distance between the person who signs your paperwork and the other person who gets paid. So it's not exactly on equal footing, but we're trying to keep the distance as short as possible in order to kind of maintain this camaraderie feel and making sure that it's not just us living the dream of creating games that we want, but it's also our new friends who are working with us, who are living their dream and actually doing what they want to do.
So you managed to get into Lionshead?
Yeah.
Why did you leave?
So actually what happened was I mentioned that I was there at the time when Peter Molyneux was still around. And at the time there were two projects that Lionhead was working on. It was Fable III, which I was involved in, and there was Milo and Kate, the ill-fated Kinect game that was going to make all the difference and make Kinect great. And
what never happened?
It never happened, and I'm truly, truly sad about this because I've seen the game internally, and I thought if they pulled it off, it would have made a huge difference. And I was always a huge fan of Kinect. I felt it was the controller to be. No hands, no extra devices, just you using your body as a controller. So sadly this didn't work out and they cancelled the project. When they cancelled Milo and Kate, they let go of most of the team that was working with Milo and Kate, and the people who were there from the core team got introduced into the Fable team. So everyone who was kind of newest, most recent in terms of being employed, didn't get their contracts extended. So that was me, unfortunately. So I got an extension to finish Fable, and after Fable shipped, my contract ended, and I was out there in the big wide world searching for a new place.
Can you describe to us what kind of work you did on Fable III?
So I started off as a gameplay programmer, so I did a lot with handling NPCs and handling different interactions in the world, which was a lot of fun. But then afterwards...
so the NPC walks from over there. As soon as the player starts seeing them, they walk back over there, stuff like that?
This, but also like more kind of intimate, kind of behind the scenes mechanism of how the NPC would react to different stimuli.
Okay. So if the player goes there and kicks an NPC, what does the NPC do?
Exactly. But because I got so skilled or so specialized in certain elements of it, I kind of got shifted to AI programming role. So most of my responsibilities were related to AI programming. So that was a defining moment as well, because I got really invested in AI.
Am I remembering right? The big thing about Fable 3 was the dog, right?
It was actually Fable 2.
That was Fable 2 already?
Yeah, Fable 3 had the dog as well.
Yeah. And, were you involved with the dog?
A little bit, yeah.
In what kind?
Navigation of the dog, certain behaviors of the dog, although there was a dedicated person just for the dog. So even if I had like...
Lead dog programmer.
Exactly.
Was that the title? Or?
Absolutely. I remember an anecdote he told me when he was working on Fable 2. They actually made the dog pee every once in a while. It wasn't a trivial task.
I remember that. Yeah, that was always very cool when it just went off and did its business for a bit.
So actually, it was supposed to be more complex, and I think they did that. But for some reason, the folks at Microsoft didn't like it, so they told them to kind of turn it off, turn it down a bit. And he was fairly angry because it took him, I think, a month to do all the features for that.
What was he trying to do? A dog actually marking its territory, or was that the goal even?
I didn't investigate further. He was already pretty pissed at the time this got cancelled.
But you yourself, you didn't have anything to do with the dog, just NPCs. Okay.
Yeah, that was good fun. It was, I was always fascinated by the fact that when creating a game, you create a world most of the time along with it. And when you create a world, you want to populate it with people and things. And if you populate it with people, the world is only as good as how the people live in it. So if they behave in a very stupid way, the world doesn't seem immersive, it doesn't seem real. So it's an interesting challenge to be trying to get the people to actually immerse you in that fantasy of this world, be it a realistic world, a semi-realistic world, a fantasy world like Fable.
So like your colleague that was working on the dog and was angry that he couldn't do what he wanted to do, he probably got attached to this dog and it was kind of his dog. Did you feel a similar thing with your NPCs? Or to phrase it differently, if players abuse NPCs, hit them or kick them or do something with them that they aren't supposed to do in the game, does that hurt you a little bit because it's your NPC?
No, I'm all about the players being in control. That's what defines the medium, I think. It's interaction, it's how people try to meddle with whatever game you present them to. So if their reaction is, they play GTA and they go on a killing spree in the city, that's a valid response from a player, and the world should react to it accordingly. Okay. But if they decide they want to live out the fantasy as a law-abiding taxi driver, they can do that, and the world should react accordingly as well.
Okay. So you don't guard your NPCs generously. We can't stop talking about Lionhead without talking about Peter Molyneux.
Right.
Did you have any... He's like this legendary figure in the game industry. He's had a bit of a rough time lately, but at that time he was one of the big names, one of the big heroes of a lot of people. Did you meet him a lot? Did you have interactions with him?
A few. Yeah, he was very busy at the time because he was also the, I don't remember the exact title, I think it was VP or something at Microsoft Game Studios Europe, so he was traveling all across the Microsoft Game Studios in different countries in Europe. But he was invested in the project, so he held a couple of meetings. I've met him personally a couple of times when I started, and then on different events, or like when he came over to the Fable floor to see what's going on. And the funny part is, like, I never liked the fact that people kind of and we took the piss out of him, especially in the Polish press. I noticed a lot of people being very skeptical about what he promised, what he did, and obviously this spread later on to the foreign press. But I always admired him for what he did with all the games in the 90s, but also later with Fable series and what he's doing now. And I always considered him an idol in terms of, and a hero in terms of game development, and someone who is a good example of what to follow in terms of living with your vision, developing your vision, and pursuing your vision in a very, very enthusiastic way. And the thing is, he is like that.
I think that was kind of his downfall, right? That he was a bit too enthusiastic about stuff and over-promised again and again. Is he like that as an actual person, as a private person, or is that more like his public persona?
No, he is like that. That's the thing. This is like natural Peter going all enthusiastic about the ideas he comes up with, or someone else comes up with what he likes them. So that's why he was, the visionary leading a team, and people looked up to him. And I think that the problem was, talking to the press, obviously, because if someone quotes you, it looks differently in a magazine or, in an interview posted online. It looks differently if you're talking to a person. You see he's just like boiling up with all these ideas. And, I sympathize, because all game developers who want to be creative and are creative have 1,000 ideas per minute, and they want to share them with the rest of the world one way or the other. And sometimes there are people who can restrict themselves and, I'll sit down, I'll write this down, I'll make a prototype, and then I'm going to show it. But Peter was all about, kind of spilling the ideas out. And I myself am sometimes like that, so I totally understood him.
Are you trying to emulate that in your own studio, even knowing that it can backfire hard, as it did in Molyneux's case?
I'm trying to restrict that to to Juliusz and maybe to one or two people at the time. So it's not like someone's kind of dumping all of these ideas on top of 12 people, and they're like, okay, should we do that now or later? What's going on? It's not easy, having a lot of ideas, sitting on them, and not trying to rush them to implement them in some way. So Peter is just super creative, and the only problem was that people took his words literally, which it was justified to take his words literally, because you would assume that a developer talking about their game is making is telling facts. He was often telling his hopes or fantasies on how the game developed to be. But of course, life comes in the way, and there's budgets, there's time constraints, there's just a limited amount of work you can do before certain things.
And I think Milo and Kay kind of showed that some of his hopes may have been just way ahead of its time, way ahead of the actual technology to make it possible, right? So, Lionhead, and then that wasn't it with your AAA career, but you just went on to another huge company, CD Projekt, and you worked on The Witcher 3.
Which is an amazing game, by the way.
Which is a game that we're both big fans of. That's another reason why we wanted to talk to you, because we're excited about this. How did you make that move? How did you go to CD Projekt?
So what happened was I was actually invited over by a colleague of mine who used to work at Lionhead, and he moved over to CD Projekt, and out of the blue he calls me and says, I'm working on this new project that we have, and maybe you'd be interested. We're looking for an AI programmer if you're not too busy. I'm like, yes, of course, count me in.
Had you already played the other Witcher games before?
Oh yeah, they're a huge thing in Poland, even before the rest of the world heard about them, because they're based on a Polish fantasy saga. You could say if the world fantasy owes a lot to Tolkien, Polish fantasy books owe a lot to Sapkowski, who created the Witcher series. So, pretty much every geeky teenager in Poland reads Sapkowski. So that's it. And everyone knew Geralt, and everyone was super excited when we heard that CD Projekt would be making a game about Geralt. And so I went in, but I was actually hoping to get on board a different project. Because I knew they were going to do Witcher 3, that was almost a given. But they had a secret project in the works, and no one knew what it would be at the time. The only information I had was that it would be an RPG with guns, as far as I remember. An RPG with guns. So I went in for an interview. They liked me. I talked to a bunch of people, and they said yes almost instantly. I think it was like a week, and I knew I'm in. So they invited me over for, I think it was the 1st of June or something like that. So I come in, and...
Sorry to interrupt you. Was that kind of similar than when you got into Lionhead, or was it completely different because you had this experience already of working on a big project in a big studio?
It was different for a number of reasons, but being more experienced, fresh out of college, I was actually invited to join rather than applying for the job, which made the difference, but also because of the fact that I had the experience. The interview was structured differently than the one I had at Lionhead, where at Lionhead they were very kind of... There was a certain standard required, so I had to know my stuff in terms of technical things, programming, and they were fishing for people who had this kind of creative side to them, so they would be able to creatively solve problems, even if they were just technical problems. For CD Projekt, it was more of a partner talk, I guess. They kind of verified my technical capabilities, but afterwards it was mostly talking about...
So when Lionhead hired you, it was more like looking at a person and hoping to develop the skills and seeing potential in someone and knowing full well that they would probably have to train you in a lot of things. And CD Projekt was, we need this job filled, let's see if this person can do all the stuff that needs to be done. Okay. So
it was very nice of Lionhead to kind of reach out to newcomers in the industry, because it's usually the kind of most challenging thing to do, the first step. It's catch-22. There's studios hiring, but they want experienced people, but there's no studios hiring non-experienced people, so how do you get the experience? And at the time, there weren't as many studios, and the indie game development scene was still very early in its inception, so the issue was that there wasn't really any way you could get the experience unless you were already kind of knee-deep in the scene and you know what to do and you knew the tools and maybe you had a game under your belt published already. But it was fairly unheard of in comparison to what's going on now, when the barrier of entry is so low that you don't have to be technical and you can create a game, which is fantastic, and you can earn that experience even in your own time, which makes things amazing. But back then it was a bit different. So for CD Projekt, I kind of sweet-talked them. They liked me well enough, so they invited me over, and it turned out that I'll be joining the Cyberpunk team. So this was just before I joined. This was revealed, I think, like literally a couple of days before I joined. And I come in.
And we basically haven't heard anything since. It's just now it's been rumored that maybe they'll show it at E3 this year, but I think it's been denied, if I'm not mistaken. So still a very mysterious project. Fingers
crossed, because if and when it comes out, I'm sure it'll be an interesting game to play. So I'm looking very forward to that, especially Cyberpunk fans.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about that later, because I want to talk about your getup. But so, you worked on Cyberpunk, or you weird off to Witcher right away?
So to finish off, the story is I come in on my first day, and the lady in the reception greets me, and I tell her that I'm here to join the Cyberpunk team. And she's, like someone will be with you in a moment. And a person comes in, takes me, I'm walking, and I'm like, isn't this the Witcher floor? And they're like, yeah. That's not the team I'm joining. So, oh no, it is. You're on the Witcher 3 team. Like, okay. Well, something happened along the way, and I got snatched by the Witcher team. At this time, at that time, Witcher 3 was nearing the end of pre-production, and the game was completed with, I don't remember how many people on board, but it was already hundreds, right? At the time, I think the team was 50 maybe, so it was still fairly small. I might be off by a dozen or two, but generally it was still under 100, most likely. And there was only a handful of programmers, and I was the first AEI programmer to join in. it's kind of funny because I talked to an AI lead during my interviews, but then the AI lead left. I joined in, and the new AI lead came after me. So we kind of started reworking the architecture of AI for Witcher 3, which I think worked really nicely, which you can see in the game.
That sounds like a lot of like moving around of people without telling them. Is that an example of how the situation in the company is?
Well,
or would you say that was a one-off thing that only happened to you?
Well, in that, like I don't know about others. I didn't hear about other examples of people being transitioned, like joining Cyberpunk and being transitioned to Witcher 3. This happened later when Witcher 3 was more advanced and they decided to kind of speed things up because they were already hitting delays. But at the time, I think it was just me that got transferred.
Did you work on Roach?
So no, I didn't work on the horse. My colleague Erwan worked on the horse's AI. I was doing mostly NPC stuff again.
Yeah.
A lot to do with how people respond, how the AI in general worked in the Witcher game, and how the designers were able to later plug in their custom behaviors for different monsters and friendly NPCs, and how it kind of all fit together. But then again, like I spent 2 years roughly at CD Projekt, so I didn't stay until the end of the project, so it wasn't just me doing the AI, of course.
Yeah.
A bunch of other talented people.
Witcher is a game that was like universally loved. Everyone had sang high praise of the game, but there was also a lot of like because it's an open world game, because it's so huge, it's always you always have to expect that a lot of stuff just goes wrong, like NPCs doing weird stuff, or especially Roach. There was a lot of like jokes about Roach being on top of a house, or Roach jumping down a river or something that the horse shouldn't have done, or whatever. Yeah, is that from the programmer's point of view, from someone that does all that behavior stuff? Is that funny to you as well, or do you think, oh my god, we should have worked harder and longer on this, it shouldn't happen? Does it hurt?
It's totally hilarious. The AI bugs are always the best bugs there can be. Every AI meeting we had at Lionhead would end in like crazy laughter, because we would have all sorts of bizarre and very almost untasteful situations with NPCs doing weird stuff. It's like, oh, we can't show this to people. So it was the same with Witcher. You had a lot of really, really weird situations with the horse, but also with the NPCs. I think my favorite bug that I actually got assigned a bug, and someone tells me I have this bug with the werewolf. I'm like, okay, this sounds interesting. So I play the werewolf part, and someone comes over and leans over my shoulder, and they're watching at me playing, and what happens is I'm facing a completely naked guy, but he doesn't have any genitals or anything. He's just like this asexual being with a huge tummy, and he's...
I just wanted to say like a Ken doll, but no, Ken would never have a huge tummy, like a very, very unfit Ken doll. All right.
Exactly, and he says he's the werewolf and he's going to kill me. And what happens next is that he reaches into his butt and he pulls a sword out, and he lunges at me with the sword. I'm like, what? And the guy behind
butt sword.
The guy behind me is watching this, and he says, so is the bug the fact that he pulls the sword out of his ass, or is that something else? I'm like, so it's supposedly spawning of the werewolf, but I think that the sword part is more important.
So if something like that, I mean, that's obviously something you try to correct before the game shipped, but if still weird stuff happens, people film it or put it on the internet, is that like a trophy that you guys collect? I made a meme.
Yeah, I think like every developer loves to see, funny glitches that are discovered by the players, or like things they didn't anticipate about their own game. And like you said, open world games especially introduce the amount of randomization or uncertainty that you can't really predict everything that's going to happen. That's one of the fun parts about open world games. There's emerging gameplay. You see like animals chasing each other in a weird fashion because the AI screwed something over, and it comes off as something that was almost planned, and it's an adventure, unique adventure. Someone says like, "Oh, I witnessed this," and the other person says, "No way, I witnessed something else." And it's part of the fun. I think it's something we should strive for in any game, almost even very linear ones, where you have these moments which are very unique, and like two gamers sharing experience can say something different about the game, not just on the emotional level, but also just by witnessing something different.
It becomes alive through the mistakes as well, not just the stuff that works, right?
Exactly.
So I think we have to finally start veering to the point where you leave AAA gaming and do your own company. Why? What was not good anymore? Because working at Lion's Head and working on The Witcher 3 is kind of the dream of a lot of developers, a lot of people here. Why did you decide, no, that's not it, I want to do something else?
So, Lionhead was fantastic, and I kind of went in there as this completely fresh, green person. I didn't know anything about game development, and pretty much Lionhead shaped me early on as a developer. I knew what I would want from game development, and I knew what I would want to achieve as an individual person, but also as a team member for any team that I might join in the future. But already after leaving Lionhead, I thought that this is great, and I enjoyed my time at Lionhead immensely. Like, there's not a single thing I can say bad about Lionhead at this point. Like, in retrospect, they found out different mistakes that they made in production and whatnot, but as a developer back then, like, it was until this day, not counting Robot Gentleman, of course, this was the best work environment I've worked in terms of how they treated their developers, but also how they handled their projects and the overall vision of the company. But I already knew that one day I will want to be even more creative, and you can be immensely creative as a part of a fantastic team like at Lionhead, but there's always the kind of boxing of your specialization. So as an AI programmer, I would always do AI, and I would do a lot of things, but I wouldn't do other things because I simply didn't have any business going into that.
And the more you do that, the more you get locked in to doing just that. Which
is awesome if you want to kind of pursue a career as this senior AI programmer, which some people want, because everyone wants something different, and you would be like the best AI programmer somewhere, and some people would love that. I'm more of I think a T guy, that's what the people at Valve call it. So there is an area I'm expert at to a certain degree, which is, I guess, programming, because I'm a programmer by trade, but at the same time I'm kind of spreading my skills more widely and going into different directions, because I believe that enriches me as not only as a developer, but also as a person, and makes my job even more fun.
So it was about breadth instead of depth. You wanted to break out of that specialization train and do other things as well.
Exactly.
And it was not like related to some kind of exhaustion or frustration at CD Projekt?
So yeah, at CD Projekt, in comparison to Lionhead, where my contract just pretty much ran out and I had to leave no matter what, at CD Projekt I quit on my own accord because I was not happy with how they handled their development team, and I was not happy with how they talk to their individual developers, including myself. Hence the decision to maybe a bit premature, because I was actually hoping to kind of stay until the end of the project. But because of how the situation developed, I decided to quit earlier and start my own thing much sooner. So that's how it started.
I think we have to kind of come to a close, but I want to ask you about one thing. You had a surprising success with 60 Seconds, which was the first game that Robot Gentleman released, right?
Yes.
You didn't expect, you told us this morning in the talk, you didn't expect a lot of success, and it kind of blew up in your faces. It was much more successful than you thought. We heard about this story that one aspect of that is that it got copied and re-uploaded, your game. Can you tell us this story? How did this happen? What happened?
wasn't as much as copying and re-uploading the game, fortunately. That's more of a case like what happened with Ridiculous Fishing, where the guys at Vlambeer had the issue of not releasing early enough for iOS, and then someone took their idea and pretty much copied the game mechanics and kind of stole their thunder. In our case, the only issue that we faced was we released our game for iOS, and a lot of people were waiting for it on Android. And what happened was the game wasn't simple enough to be copied overnight, which was a massive luck on our part, partly because the game contains over 200 pages of text. And it's you can copy game mechanics and you can emulate them in your own setting, but copying text is much more difficult, especially text that's relatively high quality. So we never got copied one-to-one, but there were people who were trying to benefit off people searching for 60 seconds on Android. They would upload these facade clones which would look like 60 seconds. People would install them and they would get flooded with advertisements. And there was still our menu in there, copied one-to-one, so people would try to go in, but there was no game. It was just an app to lure you into it and to make you click on ads. So someone earns the ad revenue money.
I'm guessing there was a lot of work to get rid of that, right?
Well, I must admit that Google's mechanism for reporting copyright infringement and violations like that is super clunky, and the response rate is not that good. So we would wait a long time before anything would happen, anything would move. So I think the record was we reported an app when it was still below 10,000 downloads. They only took it down after it reached over 500,000 downloads.
The fake game.
The fake app, yeah. So
that's
it was 500,000 people who got tricked into believing this was our game, got in, clicked at least one ad, so someone earned a lot of money on it, exploiting the fact that Google takes their time to respond, and then the fact that someone is actually allowing you to make ad revenue money without the proxy of Google Store or anything else. So even though they got taken out, and if they earned money on Google would probably block their earnings and whatnot. But with the ads revenues, you don't have that because that's an external party.
Was that this morning you talked a little bit of how overwhelming that success was and how much more time you had to spend on this game that you were kind of done with because of that success? Was that also part of that building frustration that you still have to take care of this game even if you've kind of through with it because you've worked on it so long?
Absolutely. It's a bit of a love and hate relationship, I would say, because it is our baby. And I like 60 Seconds as a game. We made a game that we wanted to play, and we made a game for... It's kind of weird because we made a niche text adventure game, pretty much, just coated in a nice layer of 2D graphics, and suddenly it turns out it's not just 30-year-old farts like us who want to play the game. It's a lot of other people. But yeah, it's after a while it gets pretty exhausting because you know it inside out. But on one hand, you want to do something new because you're tired. On the other hand, you have this notion that you wouldn't leave your baby alone. You want to kind of keep growing it, keep taking care of it, and that's what we did. And it was very hard to find the balance. And we were only able to kind of finding the balance after the studio was joined by more people.
Would you say you found that balance now?
Not yet exactly, but we're on a good way to actually hitting the sweet spot. So I'm hoping that before we release 60 Parsecs, which is a follow-up to 60 Seconds, I'll only be working on 60 Parsecs or our future projects, and 60 Seconds will be put in some other safe and good hands.
So to close us out, another game, another project you guys are working on is called Stray. What is it about?
So Stray is about a lost dog. He's away from home and is trying to find his way back.
Ooh, we're looping back to the dog from Lionhead, from Fable, huh? All right.
Maybe.
So, how far along is that project?
It's still at a fairly early stage. It's a completely different project than 60 Seconds, and in a number of ways, it's very ambitious. Especially it was when we started off we were still 3 people. We're bigger now, so it's, I think, more accessible to us as a studio with the size of the team and also the resources that we have at our disposal. So hopefully it'll be a bit of a different side of Robot Gentleman, of how we do games. And the idea is that we want every of our games to be fairly unique. So it's not like you have 60 Seconds, 2000, and you can't really tell them apart. Even if we do the follow-up, like 60 Parsecs, it's going to be a unique game in its own right, and Stray is going to be even more different.
So if you had to condense the vision that you try to utilize to go forward in like a couple of sentences, what would it be? What's
for the vision? Games or for the studio?
Just the vision for the studio.
I'd say be creative, be bold. And no regrets. I think it's what I talked about it during my lecture. A lot of people give up on their vision, and I think sticking to your vision is the most important part. Even if, to a certain degree, it consumes you. If you end up with doing something else, you've lost in a way. And I would never want to find myself in a situation where I have to surrender because I know it's game over. It's no longer the thing I wanted to make. So definitely try to overstep, to cross boundaries, get out of the comfort zone, try to push the medium forward. There's room for that, and it's the best time ever to do that. It's a waste of time to be stuck in doing games which are not very creative or not very innovative. There's audiences for everything, and you can try all sorts of crazy experiments, and sure, a lot of them will not work out, but that's part of the fun, part of the learning. It's up to you to kind of decide on how much you can invest, and you can maybe even dedicate to achieve that.
Be creative, be bold, stick to your weird ideas. I think that's a motto that closes us nicely. I think some of the results of that kind of vision we see here on the exhibition floor. Dominik Gotojuch, thank you very much for your time, for spending time with us. We're going to close out the stream now. A couple of people are still listening to us, so I'm going to quickly switch back to Swiss German to tell them goodbye. Merci vielmals, dass uns zugelassen habt, statt zugeschaut, wie sonst. Danke für eure Zeit. Gebt uns einen Daumen hoch, wenn ihr es trotz aller technischen Probleme gut gefunden habt heute. Wir sind am Montag wieder online auf SRF Digital. Die Martina und ich spielen die zweite Runde VR-Games. Wir sehen uns am Montagabend am 8. und dann wieder ein normales Geek-Sofa am Mittwoch am 1. Bis dann, und jetzt kommt das Wörtchen, das ich immer sage. Tschüssi! Habe ich es richtig gesagt?
Ich
Mittwoch am 1.
Sie wissen.
Warte, ich muss da noch den richtigen Zeiger finden. So, adieu!